So, how much risk do you take in your retirement portfolio? Today, we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, one of the big debates amongst the advisor community is how much should an investor carry in stock during retirement? Very important to be on the same page. This is what we're going to focus on today and talk a little bit about. Make sure that you are on the right side of risk where you get reward and not on the wrong side of risk. And we'll be talking about that. In the meantime, if you've got a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. And when you get to the site at the top of the page, you'll have the ability to click through and ask a question. Send me over a question. I'd love to get your questions. And if I can shed some light, point you to a resource, or take care of something for you, certainly will want to do that. That's at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. So you got this whole concept of risk, and we talk a lot about this on Prudent Money because it goes like this. And this is opposite of really what you see in traditional financial services circles. But from my standpoint, I look at it simply this way. If you can control the risk, the growth in return will follow. It's just so very important. And one of the books that I'm working on right now talks a lot about what you do during the first 7 years leading up to retirement, and then the first 7 years of retirement, before you start retirement, and then when you start retirement. The decisions that you make are absolutely critical and should be decisions that are made with a lot of discussion, a lot of prayer, and to make sure that you are doing the best that you can do for this time that you've saved for and put money back and invested, maybe sacrificed to get to this point. You want to make sure that 2 or 3 years of decision making doesn't unravel everything. So very, very important question to ask. This particular article that I came across really talks about in kind of broad strokes why it's so very important to have maybe a bigger percentage of stock or mutual fund or stock mutual funds in your portfolio at retirement. I'm not opposed to having stocks, and I'm not opposed to having stock-based mutual funds or any of that, or taking risks as far as that goes. I do find it very important to make sure that the risk that we talk about, that I talk about with clients, is a good representation of the risk that they want to take. And oftentimes, I mean, it's not a science, as someone would have you believe. I think it's more of an art to be able to sit and talk and really talk about what is important, what risk, what loss means, and that type of thing, so that there's no misunderstandings. But this could be, out of any of this that I'm writing today, this could be one of the most important questions. How much risk is too much? When we're talking about risk exposure, is the make or break question. I think it is probably the most important one a question that we have, and this all came about of a article that we talked about last week. That they were talking about the risk zone, which is 5 years before and 5 years after. I think you need a bigger span, quite frankly. And I focus more on the 7 years before and the 7 years afterwards. And what all that means, and what the what the critical decisions are that you should be making. And the reality is, if you're going to use a heavier dosage of stock and invest with more risk in mind, then unless you have a really strong strategy, which I would say most in the industry don't follow a strategy. They just kind of ride the roller coaster. But unless you have a very strong risk strategy in place, you're going to have a situation, more than likely. You might be lucky and it may get pushed off into the future to where you can handle it, or it may be right that the worst part of the timeline of getting you to retirement. But you may go through a situation like a bear market. And that was the discussion in this article, was primarily on the fact, and I agree with this, is that investors should be really, really careful these days with their investments, with the risks they're taking, because I believe we're at the ending of a cycle, about to start a bear market cycle, when the market is a real tough place to make money, easier place to lose money for 2 or 3 years. And if you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, it could drastically change your ability to retire, even though you had the best laid out plans. Now, that's the problem, is that the best laid out plans that I can research and I come across leave out some of the most critical aspects of retirement. So then this is the problem. So you get to a place, you think you're planning, you think you've done all the right things, and you find out that there are gaps. And gaps are not good in retirement plans. Gaps you didn't plan for. Gaps that were as a result of too much risk, that did the one thing that you can't do in retirement, which is eliminate time. The loss of money is one thing, but I think you have to go back and you have to ask the question, how much time did I lose, and how much time am I going to need to get back on track again? And that is the question. And a very tough conversation to have. And I've had that with people who've come to me after going through a bad strategy, maybe with somebody else. And we're there to repair the damage that has been done. But I would suggest that doesn't even need to be the case if you're asking the right questions. One of the statements they make in this article was, being too conservative with investments in retirement raises the likelihood you'll run out of money. I would suggest that, the question is, of course, will I run out of money? I think that's the wrong question. The right question in my mind is, what do I have to do to make this money last until I'm 90 years old? Then I don't care what happens after that. That's the question that I have. What do I have to do? And I don't think that you turn to the plan that you're working on and say, oh, just add more stock. Now, you're going to have, I will admit, you're going to have some investment in stock to make all this work. Even the most conservatively based people, unless they've got tons and tons and tons of assets, you'll probably have to use a little bit of stock, but nothing that I think is prudent when it comes to what Pop Culture Finance writes about. But to me, will I make it or not to age 90 with this amount of money left over is the question. What do I have to do? It takes care of itself year by year by year by year. And it takes care of itself by making sure that you stand within the boundaries of where you're supposed to be as far as a balance of risk, a balance of conservative investing, a balance of maybe even guaranteed type investing. And there's a lot of things that you can do, but checking this year in, year out, even maybe a couple of times a year to make sure you're on track is, to me, the answer to that question, will I run out of money or not? Not starting kind of with the back end of, let's just add more stock. I don't think that, like I said, I don't think that is the answer. Picture with me, if you can. I know it's tough if you're driving or maybe you can draw this out on a piece of paper. But what Pop Culture Finance looks at it and says, if I want to raise the likelihood of making more money to fund this goal from point A to point B for this client, then I add more stock. And as I add more stock, I increase the risk. Or if I want to decrease the risk, I reduce the amount of stock, which reduces, in most cases, not going to say this happens all the time. Obviously, anything could go wrong. In most cases, the numbers would show, hypothetical numbers would show, is that you reduce risk by reducing stock and or risky bonds, whatever is in that particular portfolio, you reduce the risk. And that's the other thing, too. There are ways to have exposure to stock without taking an enormous amount of risk. And this is something else we can talk about, and we will talk about as we go through. There's a lot of things that this covers. This is Bob Brooks saying you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you got a question for me, go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com, and you can send a question in. I will get you taken care of. While you're there, sign up for the Prudent Money e-letter list. We'll keep you posted what you need to know. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, this article also says most wealth managers and financial advisors now recommend at least 40% in the stock market after leaving the workforce. Now, let me give you a scenario. Say that is the key. To me, 60-40 blend, that's a little bit high on the, especially if you're just going to be buying and holding it and riding the roller coaster. Maybe 40% of stock is too much. But if you want a certain goal, if you understand the potential of loss, the potential of this going the wrong way, and you're still comfortable with it, you've prayed over it, you know exactly how you want whoever's managing your money, what to do at certain times, then I've got no problem with that. To take just the average common day person and say, okay, well, you want to do this, we'll have to do this. And leave the impression that should take care of it. Because you could have one of these inconvenient cycles that I think we're about to run into. And if you're at that 7 years before, 7 years after, it could really make a negative difference in the ability to retire. But the bottom line is, most investors, and I've seen this through the tech bust in 2000 and the bear market financial crisis between 2007 and 2008, people don't deal with big losses very well. Big shock, I know. But the problem is that once you take that big loss, because you had too much stock, you have to look at it from the standpoint of, okay, what am I going to do to make this time up I've lost and to continue withdrawing money? We're going to stop right there, take a break. This is Bob Brooks. I will be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30 here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
This is Rob Randall, your host and teacher of the Invisible War radio program. The Invisible War is the study of God's Word on how to walk in Christ's victory and the spiritual battles we face against the powers of darkness. Join me every Sunday morning at 9 right here on KDKR and KYJC in Commerce, your station for life.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you got a question for me, please go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Send it in, and I will get you taken care of. We're talking about how much stock do you really need to balance out a portfolio in retirement. Like I said, there's a lot of opinions. I'm not saying mine is right. This is the way I feel after 34 years of looking at these different analyses, reading, researching, working with clients in real time. This is just the way that I believe. But here's the big problem, is that you get down the road, you have too much stock in your portfolio, and you take a big hit. And now you're looking at, boy, I've lost all this money, I've lost all this time, now what? And at the same time that all this is happening, you've been taking money out of the portfolio, and based on the numbers, you're taking way more out than you should be. But you got to have money to live off of. Nobody has prepared you for this particular scenario. You go to many financial advisors, and they tell you, well, this is just the way it goes. That's just write it out. You're a long-term investor, but does nothing to really tell you that if you continue down this path, you're going to run out of money, because taking withdrawals out and excessive withdrawals, which they do turn into excessive withdrawals because the value of the account's going down so quickly, you get to a situation where you're doing yourself way more harm than good. And I've known of stories of investors who lost so much money they had to go back to work, that they couldn't put their kids through college. I mean, money they've saved, sacrificed over for a long time, everything drastically changed. And I just don't believe that you have to live like that. So, the loss of time, once again, translates into a loss of retirement goals, because this is what you're looking at. How much time is it going to take for me to get back to where I was? Then there is not only losses from a bear market cycle, there comes to the situation that you run into inflation, like so many people are right now. And I hear this story, it seems like I know it's not, but it seems like daily about, at what point do things turn around and we get into a situation where prices are coming down. I wish I knew. I mean, I think that the first thing that has to be done is to get away from the things that are causing inflation. Don't mean to be Captain Obvious, but things that are causing inflation, and get things back into balance. And that's going to be a challenge unless we start making different decisions. Things are just really out of balance, and that's what you get. Inflation is the result of everything getting out of balance. But this article says generating income is critical, which I agree, and bonds are part of that. But staying in equities is also important to mitigate inflation due to longevity risk. What all that means is that you're going to have to continue to take more risk to grow your portfolio to cover the longevity risk. What they're saying there is you planned on living to be 80, and now you looks like you're going to be 95. How are you going to fund that time period, and what steps are you going to take to mitigate inflation? I look at inflation a little bit differently, and this is where I think that it's extremely important to have a game plan that covers all the areas, and to make sure that you are staying on top of that game plan with the help of an advisor, and that's my bias, of course. Help of an advisor to help you see where you're at and determine if you need to make changes, because the most effective changes are made when you need to be making them, not 10 weeks down the road when you should have made it. So staying on top of things, staying on top of your numbers. I mean, that's the thing that you got to remember, is that numbers are black and white. And if you stay on top of them, it'll help you from the standpoint of making the key critical decisions that you need to be making. But, they say, once again, generating income is critical. So is putting money in stocks. I think that you can mitigate inflation and take care of longevity risk, meaning you lived longer than you thought you would, by not necessarily putting more stocks in, but just implementing different strategies. Being overly conservative with your investments, they say, after exiting the workforce raises the likelihood you'll run out of money in retirement. The only good reason, and this could be summed up to cover a lot of things. But let's just start with this. A good reason for running out of risk is that you violated your boundaries, or you are forced to violate your boundaries. And for some situations, a lot of situations, life happens, things happen that you don't expect, change happens, and what you thought would be the case for your financial situation in retirement has totally changed. And it's just a part of life. That's why I think, and I'm a big believer in, is that when change is happening, when you see change potentially happening, that's when you sit down and you go, let's go over the numbers. Let's go over the strategies. What are we going to do if this happens? What are we going to do if that happens? It's not predicting what could happen. It is preparing for what could happen. And the more prepared you are for whatever comes your way, the more confident you can make decisions, the more confident that you can make wise decisions and mitigate damage from the change that's potentially happening. But one of the things that I think is very important before anybody goes into retirement is the ability to sit down and go, okay, what could go wrong? And plan for that. I remember being a younger advisor, and during that time period where every time you turned around, somebody was predicting things. I don't think that as I get older and I see what happens, I don't think it's about predicting things. I think it's about being prepared to handle change. And that's what I'm a very, very big believer on is making sure that you are ready, that you can handle change. This article, back to talking about inflation, I think that there's two things I would consider based on what everybody thinks about inflation, and everybody's getting hit with higher prices and that kind of thing. The first thing is I think that we all individually have different inflation rates on our own personal lives. It all depends on how you spend money, and I think you can lower, obviously, the inflation rate, lower prices by being a little bit better at the way you go about spending money. The second thing is inflation rates, and they should be, if you're running any financial numbers with a financial advisor, there's a degree of inflation that is built into the plan. So some of this inflation, you should be able to absorb some of it. It's the additional inflation that you have to work with in your own financial plan. I hope that makes sense. But back to this article, they talk about being overly conservative with your investments. I want to kind of come back to this. After exiting the workforce raises the likelihood you'll run out of money. If you have planned out a realistic strategy that shows you how much money you can take out for how long, you should not run out of money unless something horrible has happened, that everything changed and you couldn't rebound from it. And that's always a risk we play with, that we face with everything in our lives that you could face financially and through all kinds of different situations. But I don't agree just because you're being conservative. It really comes down to, if I grow my money on average and I spend my money a certain way and I grow my money by a percent on average, then as long as those numbers are reviewed year after year to make sure you're staying on target, I mean, that's a very big part of it as well. But as long as you're staying on target, you should be able to achieve more of what you're hoping that you're going to achieve down the road. And it's interesting. This article makes it sound as if we're all going to live to be we're all going to be at 100 or something. But I think the bottom line is they make bold statements as if they're absolute truths in a lot of these articles. You should always ask the question, well, what is the other side of the story? When could that not be true? How would that apply to my life, the way that I spend money? Or how would that apply to my life as the way I invest money? There's a lot of questions I think that need to be asked, a lot of questions that aren't being asked, and this is why we talk about it. I want to bring it out there. I want to give you another interpretation of what you're hearing and tell you that there are ways to do this differently to where you don't have to face a lot of these risks and load up your portfolio on stock, and especially if you're in a situation where you just don't actually have the right risk level to do that. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. Like I thought I wasn't going to get through all of that I want to talk to you about, and we will talk about it tomorrow. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Listen, if you got a question for me, please go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Send it in, and I will get you taken care of. But for today, we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.